Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding your city transformed overnight. The safe streets you've known for decades now lined with desperate faces. The park where your grandchildren played now a sprawling tent city. The grocery store where you've shopped for 30 years, surrounded by makeshift shelters and desperate people. This nightmare isn't fiction. It's the reality in Denver, Colorado. And here's what should keep you up at night. It could be your city next. The collapse happened so fast that most residents didn't see it coming. One day, Denver was a thriving metropolis with pristine mountain views and vibrant communities. The next, entire neighborhoods transformed into what locals now call zombie zones. Areas where elderly residents are forced to abandon their homes of decades, where family businesses shut down overnight, where the American dream has shattered into 1,000 pieces. What you're about to discover in the next 25 minutes isn't just Denver's story. It's a warning that every American needs to hear. Because while we focus on the mile-high city today, the same forces that created this crisis are already at work in cities across America. You'll see exactly how one of the country's most livable cities became ground zero for a humanitarian crisis that's forcing thousands of seniors out of their homes. The facts and numbers. Let's start with something that stopped me in my tracks when I first uncovered it. In 2019, Denver's homeless population was around 4,000, a number that already had city officials concerned. Today, that number has exploded to over 9,000, and those are just the ones we can count. Think about that for a moment. More than double in just 5 years. But here's what makes this truly frightening. Experts believe the real number is significantly higher. For every person you see on the street, there are countless others you don't. Seniors living invisibly out of their cars, rotating between relatives' homes, or barely hanging on to their housing by a thread. But I need you to understand something crucial. These aren't just numbers on a page. Each one represents a human being, someone's parent, grandparent, or child. And here's what should make everyone paying attention deeply uncomfortable. 30% of Denver's homeless population is over 55 years old. We're talking about people who worked their whole lives, saved for retirement, and did everything right. People who never imagined they'd end up here. A crisis like this doesn't happen overnight, even though it might seem that way to those caught in its grip. To understand how Denver reached this breaking point and why your city might be next, we need to look at a story that's both uniquely Denver and frighteningly universal. Because once you see the pattern, you'll never look at your own city the same way again. The perfect storm. 5 years ago, Denver was a different world, a place where retirement dreams could flourish, where a life of hard work meant a secure future, where your social security check could comfortably cover the basics. That Denver is gone. And what replaced it should make every American city take notice. Think back to 2019. Denver's seniors had built their retirement plans on what seemed like solid ground. Their monthly social security checks covered rent with enough left over for groceries and medicine. Communities were stable. Neighbors knew neighbors. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked. Then came what locals now call the surge. It started with a ripple, a few apartment buildings changing hands. Nothing unusual, just normal real estate transactions. But then those ripples became waves. Corporate investors began buying up entire blocks. Buildings that had housed the same families for decades suddenly changed ownership overnight. And with new owners came new rules, new rates, and notices taped to hundreds of doors across the city. Take a moment and imagine going to check your mail, just like any other day. But today, there's a letter. Your rent isn't just going up, it's doubling. Your $1,200 apartment will now cost $2,100. Your carefully planned retirement budget, it just shattered. But it wasn't just housing. As Denver's popularity grew, everything started costing more. Basic groceries, the same items seniors had been buying for years, suddenly required painful choices. A gallon of milk or heart medication, fresh vegetables or the electric bill. These aren't hypothetical decisions. They're daily reality for thousands of Denver's seniors. The traditional safety nets, they're stretched to breaking point. Food banks that once served dozens now try to feed hundreds. Community centers that offered support are overwhelmed. Churches that always helped their elderly members can barely keep their own doors open. Here's what makes Denver's crisis different. It's affecting people who did everything right. We're not talking about those who failed to plan or made risky financial decisions. These are teachers who educated our children, nurses who cared for our sick, civil servants who kept our cities running, people who worked hard, saved carefully, and followed all the rules of building a secure future. And that's perhaps the most terrifying part of this story. These seniors followed the same retirement playbook many of you are following right now. They saved, they budgeted, they chose modest lifestyles within their means, but the rules changed mid-game, and no one warned them. Crises have fallen woefully short. Emergency shelters aren't designed for elderly residents. Affordable housing waitlists stretch years into the future. Support programs are underfunded and overwhelmed. Meanwhile, more seniors join the ranks of the homeless each week. But here's why this story matters beyond Denver. The conditions that created this perfect storm, soaring housing costs, inadequate Social Security benefits, rising medical expenses, and disappearing community resources, exist in cities across America. The same pressure systems that collided in Denver are building in other communities right now. The question isn't whether these forces could affect your city. The question is, will your community recognize the warning signs before it's too late? If you're starting to see parallels with changes in your own city, pay close attention to what comes next, because understanding how this crisis unfolded in Denver might be the key to preventing it in your community. The ripple effects. When a city loses its elderly population, it loses more than just residents. It loses its soul. And what's happening in Denver right now shows us exactly how this loss ripples through every aspect of community life, transforming neighborhoods in ways that few could have predicted. Think of a city like a tapestry, each thread connected to countless others, creating a pattern that's taken generations to weave. Now, imagine watching that tapestry unravel, thread by thread, neighborhood by neighborhood. That's what's happening in Denver, and the pattern of destruction is something every American city needs to understand. Let's start downtown. Remember the 16th Street Mall? It used to be Denver's crown jewel, a mile-long stretch of shops, restaurants, and entertainment that drew visitors from around the world. Today, it tells a different story. The windows that once displayed local goods now show "For Lease" signs. The streets that once bustled with life have gone quiet. The heart of the city isn't just hurting, it's barely beating. If you're seeing similar changes in your downtown area, drop a comment below. These patterns are emerging across America, and identifying them early could help your community avoid Denver's fate. But the real transformation, the one that cuts deepest, is happening in the neighborhoods. Walk down any residential street, and you'll notice what's missing. The crossing guard, who knew every child by name. The retired handyman who could fix anything. The grandmother, who watched over the neighborhood from her porch. These aren't just losses of individuals. They're losses of the invisible threads that held communities together. The ripples spread in unexpected ways. That family-owned pharmacy that delivered prescriptions to homebound seniors? Gone. They lost 40% of their customer base in 6 months. The small grocery store that offered senior discounts and carried specific brands their elderly customers preferred? Closed. The local diner where retirees gathered every morning to share news and keep an eye on the neighborhood? Empty. Hit that subscribe button if you want to learn how other cities are protecting their local businesses from this domino effect. In our next video, we'll show you the innovative programs that are helping small businesses adapt and survive. Even the parks tell a story. Washington Park used to be alive with senior walking groups and grandparents watching their grandchildren. Now, people hurry through, heads down, avoiding eye contact. These aren't just changes in scenery. They're fundamental shifts in how public spaces function in our communities. The impact on local institutions is devastating. Churches report sharp drops in attendance and volunteering. Community centers struggle to run programs that seniors used to staff. Food banks lack the retired volunteers who kept them operating. The very organizations that could help address this crisis are being weakened by it. Share this video with your local community organizations. They need to see these warning signs before their volunteer base disappears. Perhaps most alarming is what's happening to community safety. Neighborhoods with fewer elderly residents report more crime. It turns out that retired neighbors were an invisible security system. They noticed unusual activity, watched over children walking home from school, and kept an eye on vacant properties. As they disappear, so does this informal neighborhood watch. The healthcare system feels the strain beyond just emergency room visits. Community clinics report that their preventive care programs are falling apart. Without stable senior populations, early detection of health issues has plummeted. The informal networks that helped elderly neighbors get to medical appointments have dissolved. If this information has been valuable to you, take a moment to like this video and ring that notification bell. We're tracking these changes across America, and you'll want to know when these patterns start emerging in your city. Every senior forced out of their home takes with them pieces of community fabric that can't easily be replaced. Denver isn't just losing its elderly population, it's losing its memory, its volunteer base, its neighborhood watchdogs, and its sense of continuity. And here's what should keep city planners across America awake at night. These changes can happen anywhere. The question isn't whether your city could face similar challenges. It's whether you'll recognize the warning signs before it's too late. The hidden homeless. When most people think of homelessness, they picture tents on sidewalks or people sleeping in doorways. But in Denver, there's another crisis unfolding behind closed doors, one that never makes the evening news or shows up in official statistics. We're talking about the hidden homeless, the former bank manager sleeping in his daughter's basement, the retired teacher house-sitting her way through the year, the elderly couple living in their RV behind their son's house. These aren't just temporary arrangements anymore. They're becoming permanent solutions to an impossible housing market. The scale of this hidden crisis dwarfs what we see on the streets. For every visible homeless person in Denver, experts estimate there are 3 more you'll never see. They're sleeping on couches, rotating between adult children's homes, or living in cars parked in safe neighborhoods. They don't think of themselves as homeless. They call it temporary, or staying with family, or figuring things out. Many of these hidden homeless were homeowners just a few years ago. They did everything society told them to do: bought homes, paid mortgages, saved for retirement. Then property taxes doubled, insurance rates tripled, fixed incomes couldn't keep up with basic maintenance. One major repair bill or medical emergency was all it took to force them to sell. Others were long-term renters who never missed a payment until their building was sold to investors. 30 days notice and decades of stability vanished. Their Social Security checks, which once covered rent with room to spare, now barely pay for a week's stay in a budget motel. The hidden homeless go to extraordinary lengths to maintain appearances. They keep gym memberships for showers. They use coffee shops as living rooms. They carefully coordinate their movements to avoid becoming a burden on any one family member for too long. They're experts at explaining why they're between places right now. This form of homelessness is particularly cruel because it isolates people from help. They don't qualify for most homeless services because they're not homeless enough. They're too proud to use food banks. They skip medical appointments because they don't have a permanent address. Their health deteriorates, their savings disappear, and every day they slip closer to visible homelessness. The impact on families is devastating. Adult children exhaust their own savings trying to help. Grandchildren give up their bedrooms. Family relationships strain under the pressure of multi-generational living, never meant to be permanent. The very support system trying to prevent visible homelessness risks collapse. The shame associated with hidden homelessness makes it particularly difficult to address. These seniors often avoid seeking help until they're in crisis. They don't show up at housing assistance offices. They don't apply for benefits. They suffer in silence, believing their situation is somehow their own fault. This invisible crisis threatens to overwhelm the visible one. As savings accounts empty and family resources stretch to breaking point, many of these hidden homeless will eventually join the ranks of the visibly homeless. And because they've exhausted their support systems trying to avoid the streets, they'll have fewer resources to help them recover. What makes this situation particularly alarming is how quickly someone can join the ranks of the hidden homeless. One rent increase, one medical bill, one major car repair. That's all it takes to start the spiral. And because these seniors often deplete their resources trying to avoid visible homelessness, by the time they reach out for help, they're in crisis. The failed solutions. You might be wondering, surely Denver tried to solve this crisis. The city spent millions of dollars and countless hours on solutions. But here's where things get frustrating. Every attempted fix seems to have made the problem worse. Let's start with the most controversial attempt, the urban camping ban. In 2022, city officials thought they could address visible homelessness by making it illegal to camp in public spaces. The result? The crisis didn't disappear. It just went underground. Seniors who used to stay in relatively safe areas near services were forced into dark corners of the city, away from the help they desperately needed. Remember how we talked about Denver's soaring housing costs? The city's answer was rent control proposals. But by the time these made it through endless committee meetings and legal challenges, they were so watered down, they might as well have been written in invisible ink. While politicians debated, rents kept climbing. Here's where you might be thinking, what about homeless shelters? Denver tried that too. They poured money into emergency shelters, but there was one huge problem. These facilities weren't designed for elderly residents. Picture climbing onto a top bunk with arthritis, or trying to keep your diabetes medication refrigerated in a crowded shelter. It's not just impractical, it's impossible. The Housing First initiative sounded promising. The idea was simple: give people homes first, then help them with other issues. But in practice, it became housing eventually. Maybe, if you're lucky. For every new affordable unit built, 3 more households entered crisis. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon while a tsunami rolls in. Some solutions actually backfired spectacularly. Take the city's attempt to convert old motels into emergency housing. Good idea, right? But they forgot about accessibility. No elevators, narrow doorways, and steep stairs made these converted motels useless for many seniors with mobility issues. The voucher program was another well-intentioned failure. The city handed out rental assistance vouchers, but forgot one crucial detail. Landlords weren't required to accept them. In a hot rental market, why would property owners take vouchers when they could get higher rates from other tenants? Even the success stories have a dark side. The city celebrates when they house one senior, while 10 more lose their homes. It's not just a numbers game. It's a human crisis multiplying faster than solutions can keep up. Now you might be feeling discouraged. All these failed attempts, all this wasted money and time. But here's why you need to keep watching. We're about to show you what's actually working in other cities. Not band-aid solutions or quick fixes, but real, sustainable answers that Denver could implement tomorrow. Other cities' solutions. While Denver struggles, other cities are finding innovative ways to protect their senior residents. These aren't theoretical solutions. They're real programs showing real results right now. In Minneapolis, the Senior Safe Harbor program has become a model for cities nationwide. The concept is remarkably straightforward. The city negotiates directly with property owners to maintain stable rents for senior residents. In exchange, landlords receive tax incentives and guaranteed occupancy. The result? A 60% reduction in senior homelessness within just 2 years. But it's not just about housing. Salt Lake City discovered that preventing homelessness is far more effective than responding to it. Their early warning system connects with utility companies, pharmacies, and property managers to identify seniors at risk before they lose their homes. When someone misses 2 utility payments or starts skipping prescription refills, the system flags them for immediate assistance. Simple, yet revolutionary. San Antonio took a different approach by creating senior villages, not segregated retirement communities, but integrated neighborhoods where seniors can age in place. These communities combine affordable housing with on-site medical care, communal spaces, and shared transportation. Most importantly, they're built within existing neighborhoods, not isolated on the outskirts of town. In Portland, they're turning an old idea into a modern solution. The city is reviving the concept of residential hotels, but with a crucial twist. These aren't the rundown buildings of the past. They're dignified micro-apartments with private bathrooms and kitchenettes, specifically designed for senior needs. At $600 per month, including utilities, they're actually affordable on a Social Security income. Boston's Grand Family Housing Program tackles 2 problems at once. The city provides affordable apartments to seniors who are raising their grandchildren, an increasingly common situation. These units include childcare facilities, homework areas, and support services. The program has kept hundreds of families together while ensuring stable housing for both generations. Here's what these successful programs have in common. They treat housing as healthcare. They focus on prevention rather than response. They maintain dignity and independence. They integrate services rather than isolating them. They work with market forces instead of against them. The most promising solution comes from Seattle's Community Trust model. The city helps senior residents form nonprofit cooperatives that buy their apartment buildings. Instead of being at the mercy of corporate landlords, Seniors become their own property owners. The monthly costs stay stable because there's no profit motive, just the actual cost of maintaining the building. These solutions aren't just feel-good stories. They're proven strategies backed by data. Minneapolis saved $7.2 million in emergency services in the first year of their program. Salt Lake City's prevention system costs a fraction of what they used to spend on emergency shelter beds. Seattle's community trust buildings maintain 100% occupancy rates while keeping rents at 1/3 of market rates. But perhaps the most innovative solution is happening in Phoenix. They've created a senior housing supplement, an additional local payment on top of Social Security for the residents over 65. The funds come from a small tax on luxury real estate transactions. The program costs the average Phoenix resident less than $3 per month, but has prevented over 2,000 senior evictions in its first year. The cost of inaction. Some people look at Denver's homeless crisis and think, we can't afford to fix this. But here's the harsh reality. We can't afford not to. Let's look at what doing nothing really costs. The most obvious cost is in emergency medical care. When seniors lose their homes, they lose access to regular health care. Simple, treatable conditions spiral into life-threatening emergencies. A blood pressure problem that could have been managed with $30 monthly medication turns into a $50,000 hospital stay. Denver Health reports that each homeless senior averages 3 emergency room visits per month. Do the math, that's billions in preventable healthcare costs every year. Then, there's the impact on local businesses. Downtown Denver used to be a tourist magnet, drawing visitors from around the world. Now, hotel bookings are down 30%. Restaurants report a 40% drop in evening customers. Retail stores are closing. Property values in affected areas have dropped for the first time in decades. The city is losing millions in tax revenue, money that could have funded solutions. Public safety costs are skyrocketing. Police and emergency services are overwhelmed responding to calls related to homeless seniors. Each police interaction costs taxpayers hundreds of dollars. Each ambulance call costs thousands. These aren't just numbers. This is money being thrown at symptoms instead of solutions. The hidden costs are even more staggering. When seniors lose their homes, they often lose their ability to maintain their health. They stop taking medications regularly. They miss doctor's appointments. They can't maintain special diets. The result? Chronic conditions that could have been managed become acute crises. The cost of treating these preventable emergencies? It's more than 10 times what it would have cost to keep these seniors housed. But the most expensive impact isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lost community knowledge, broken family bonds, and shattered dignity. When seniors are forced out of their neighborhoods, we lose the volunteers who ran our libraries, the retired teachers who tutored our kids, the grandparents who provided childcare so parents could work. These contributions to our community might not show up on a balance sheet, but their loss affects everyone. The cruel irony? Every dollar we spend dealing with the consequences of homelessness costs more than what it would take to prevent it. A hospital stay costs more than 6 months of rent. An emergency shelter bed costs more per night than a studio apartment. An ambulance ride costs more than a month of preventive medical care. Denver is learning the hard way that inaction has a price tag. Every month we delay real solutions, the bill gets bigger. Every senior who loses their home costs the system more than it would have cost to keep them housed. Every community that dissolves costs us more than it would have cost to preserve it. What you can do, you've seen the crisis, you've seen the solutions. Now you're probably wondering, what can I actually do about this? More than you might think. While this crisis needs systemic change, that change starts with informed citizens taking action. First, let's talk about prevention. The best time to act is before someone loses their home. Check on your elderly neighbors. A missed utility bill or an overdue prescription could be the first sign they're struggling. Sometimes, simply knowing where to find help can prevent a crisis. Keep the number of your local senior services hotline handy. You never know when someone might need it. Pay attention to what's happening in your neighborhood. Are apartment buildings being sold? Are rents suddenly jumping? These are early warning signs of what happened in Denver. When you spot these changes, speak up at city council meetings. Your voice matters more than you think, especially if you bring specific examples and data. Watch your local government's actions. When housing proposals come up for vote, show up. When budgets are being discussed, be there. Politicians respond to presence. Empty seats at council meetings send a clear message that nobody cares. Social media isn't just for cat videos. Follow your local housing organizations and senior advocacy groups. Share their posts about upcoming votes, community meetings, and policy changes. Information is power, but only if it reaches the right people. Think about donating differently. Instead of giving to emergency services, consider supporting organizations that prevent homelessness, legal aid groups that help seniors fight unfair evictions, financial counseling services that help seniors manage rising costs, prevention programs that keep seniors in their homes. But the most powerful thing you can do? Change the conversation. When people talk about homelessness as inevitable, challenge that thinking. Share the solutions that are working in other cities. Talk about the cost of inaction versus the cost of prevention. Make it personal. Share this video with someone who makes decisions in your community. Your city council member, your state representative, your neighborhood association leader. Tell them you care about this issue and you're paying attention to how they handle it. Start asking questions. What early warning systems does your city have in place? How many seniors in your area are one rent increase away from homelessness? What's your city's plan for affordable senior housing? How are your local representatives voting on housing issues? The answers, or lack of answers, will tell you a lot about whether your city is prepared to prevent what happened in Denver. The Denver we knew is at a crossroads. The choices we make today will determine whether the city remains a place where people can age with dignity, or whether it becomes a cautionary tale of what happens when we fail to protect our most vulnerable citizens. As we end this journey through Denver's crisis, ask yourself, what kind of city do we want to leave for the next generation? What kind of society allows its elders to live in cars and tents after a lifetime of contribution? The answers to these questions will shape not just Denver's future, but the future of cities across America. This is NAME, reminding you that homelessness isn't just a Denver problem. It's an American problem, and it's one we must solve together. Thank you for watching, and remember, today's Denver could be tomorrow's anywhere in America.